Ladies and gentlemen, it's your favorite time of the week again. We are adults talking about cool stuff. This is ATACS, episode number 31. I'm your host, Paul from Atlanta, and joining us today are our esteemed panelists. We have Mr. Ryan from New York. Hello, Ryan. How are you doing today?
I am great. Thank you for asking.
You've missed an ATACS or two, and I understand that you have about 3 hours blocked off today to talk about all the video games that you've been playing. So I'm very excited to hear that, and I'm sure that our audience is too. Also, we have Mr. Will from Greenville, North Carolina. Hello, Will.
It's pretty good. This is episode 31.
It is.
So ATACS is now old enough to have a full-time job and not have enough time to play Persona.
Yeah, that's a sad state of affairs. Poor ATACS. And you're totally right. Mr. Flex from Raleigh, North Carolina. Hello, Flex.
I played the entirety of Persona 5 while I was 31.
I think you're lying. But, that's just a thing I guess maybe you did.
ATACS has just got to step up its game.
The numbers get fuzzy. The years bleed into one another.
Yeah, I think I started Persona 5 in 8th grade, and I just finished recently. So,
and how'd you get hold of that alpha build, early access?
I'm actually a time traveler. That's my secret.
They probably had been developing it since you were in 8th grade.
Probably. And last but not least, Mr. Nate from Wendell, North Carolina. Hello, Nate.
That's me.
That's you.
Are you still in Wendell?
I'm still in Wendell for the time being. That will change sometime soon.
All right. I can't wait I hope you move to a city that is easier to pronounce.
I'll try to find something for you.
That's wonderful that you would
contain the Nate.
No.
Wendell could not contain.
So I guess Nate, we'll just go ahead and kick off with you. I've been seeing a lot of PS4 notifications. What do you want to talk about first?
We'll get to that Monster Hunter, which is what you're alluding to, but before that, I wanna talk about zombies.
Oh right.
Oh yeah.
Are they
I forgot about
zombies?
This is exciting. I'm excited.
Okay.
How many zombies are there?
There are reportedly billions of zombies.
Are there at least 5 zombies?
There are way more than 5 zombies.
Did you kill them?
I've killed a lot of zombies. The billions, I don't know if that is maybe a little bit of false advertising, but there are a lot of zombies.
I really want to play this.
So, the game is They Are Billions, which is an early access game on Steam about fighting zombies in a steampunk zombie apocalypse. It is a real-time strategy game where you build a base, you train some military units, but primarily you're collecting resources and building a base, and then trying to survive against the endless zombie hordes.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So I saw a tweet somewhere that this was sort of like the game for people who like to just build base defense in RTS and never actually attack. Is that an accurate sort of assessment?
Absolutely. This is a game for the people who played Age of Empires 2 or StarCraft Brood War and just wanted to turtle up and build the best defenses and not do anything else. This is that game.
Yeah, I've seen it described almost as like a cross between like late 90s style RTSs and then tower defense.
Yeah.
Huh.
Which sounds pretty great.
So as a man who played a lot of Age of Empires 2,
Yes.
who really enjoyed building lots of castles and walls, you're saying I might find some fun in this one.
I'm saying, Paul, you should play this game.
All right. I will add it to my to-play list.
Whether you wait for it to come out of early access or not is up to you. But yes, it is very much in the base building style of an Age of Empires 2. You build, various buildings to access different upgrades. You have to collect a few different resources from around the map. The maps are procedurally generated every time, so you have to kind of scout around, find resources, start collecting them. But the biggest thing is making sure you wall everything off perfectly.
Yeah.
Because if the zombies get in, it's a really bad time.
If like one zombie gets in, is it bad? Like if one slips through,
yes,
and then you're like, oh crap, let me patch up this wall.
Yes. So that's, I think, one of the best executed things about this game is that zombies against a well-secured wall, not a big deal. But
But
if you mess up or try to expand a little too aggressively or don't put quite enough defenses on one spot and a couple of zombies get through, it is just a cascade of nightmares.
Is it like, is there something about the actual act of them getting through,
Yes.
or does it just mean that or is that just like the indicator that, oh wait, you're farther behind than you thought?
No, it can actually, like, literally one or two zombies getting into a spot where you have not enough defenses could actually just like build up a wave to destroy your entire civilization. And the reason that is because if they attack a building, anything other than walls, each building has basically 2 health bars. And one is it'll be completely destroyed, but before it gets completely destroyed, usually like if it takes around a third of its maximum health and damage, it'll get infected.
Oh boy.
And then it will start spewing out zombies.
wait, so the buildings themselves spew out zombies if they take enough damage?
Yes.
Wow,
Huh.
So
that sounds bad.
you end up in this situation where, and you're always kind of limited on space. So you're trying to like pack in your houses really close together to maximize space. So you end up in this position where it's like, oh crap, I pushed a little too far. Zombie snuck through and I didn't notice him, and now he's in the neighborhood full of like 30 houses stacked on top of each other. And whoops, now there are hundreds of zombies.
Great.
Oh, no.
I assume if like one slipped through and you had like, I don't know, an archer that like right as they were getting 2 buildings like started shooting them, you'd probably be fine.
Yeah. If it's just one or so, but
Yeah.
it does not take long for a couple of zombies to infect a building, and as soon as they infect it, like 4 zombies will pop out immediately.
Right. And then things
And then
get
it's just a cascading effect.
Does the game give you any like tools or options to just kind of like go scorched earth on your own base? So you're like, thematically, I just imagine you're like, okay, well, this is really bad, so we're just gonna have to like raise a whole neighborhood or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So you can demolish your own buildings and reclaim some resources from them, as long as there aren't zombies immediately near them.
Okay.
So you end up, okay, this game is awesome, but there's a lot to talk about. So you kind of start with a town center and a couple of units. And you start building some resource gathering stuff around that and build a couple houses, and then you want to quickly wall that off, right? So you have a small town with a wall around it. Then you need to start expanding out to get more resources. So you pick one area outside of that wall that you think you can expand into safely, build some stuff out there, and then do another wall around that. And you kind of keep this process going so that you have like almost like small little neighborhoods individually walled off. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so, kind of to Ryan's point, if you start to see one of your outer walls looks like it's going to be breached by one of the bigger zombie hordes that comes through, you can just take everything in that neighborhood and demolish it to stop the tide from exponentially increasing when they get through that wall.
It kind of reminds me of Attack on Titan a little bit, where you have all these like circular parts of walls, and if the like one gets breached, everyone runs back into the more inner one. Yeah,
you totally have these like very like cinematic scenes of like the outer defenses are about to fail. What do we do? I guess we burn this part and run back to the next layer of wall and hope we can hold it there, which is pretty awesome.
That sounds neat.
Yeah,
that sounds
I'm
awesome.
reading a review right now. It says this is what would happen if Red Alert, Attack on Titan, and World War Z had a child.
I don't know much about Attack on Titan, but yeah, I mean, sure.
So
Is there like a tech tree?
Yeah, but it's not big.
Okay.
So there's only like 4 or 5 military units, at least in the game currently.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got your archers, which are just fast, scouts that don't do a ton of damage. You've got soldiers that are slower but deal better damage and have more health. And then you've got a couple of higher tier units, a guy with a flamethrower, a guy with a rocket launcher, and then a big mech.
So you don't, it sounds like you probably don't get, and then also with building tech tree stuff, is it similarly
Yeah, there's like basically 3 tiers of upgrade buildings.
Okay.
So you build one and then research the next upgrade building and then build that and then research the next upgrade building and then you have access to all the technologies. And each building has like 5 or 6 technologies to research. So it's not a lot.
What are the kind of examples of, like, can you give me 1 or 2 examples of like what kind of technologies you get?
So when you start, you can build like basic gathering buildings, like you can build a quarry or a wood cutting shop or whatever it's called, or a hunting lodge or a fishing post. Most of those you can get like an upgraded version of through research. So you can just get like a better quarry or a better wood shop, and then you get other upgrade or other research leads to other resource gathering things. Like you can just build farms after you research that to get more food.
Gotcha.
So I was a little surprised to see you playing this one, partly because, like you mentioned, it's in early access, and I was kind of curious to hear. There have been some kind of really interesting or promising games like Dead Cells, maybe PUBG, in that sort of early access stage. But I've also been burned a couple times, like with Orcs Must Die in Chains. Like Will and I tried it in the kind of late beta, and it was horrible. And it was, when they released it, it was a different game, but that early experience was so bad, we almost didn't go back to it. So I was just kind of curious, like, how you're sitting on the whole it being an early access, or do you think it's going to come out soon? Or
it doesn't seem like it's going to come out soon. I kind of tried to poke around at that when I was looking at getting it. So what I would say about it is, right now it's just one mode, which is the survival mode, which is basically try to last a certain number of days in a randomly generated map while the zombies try to kill you. And that's the mode that they have now.
Okay.
They are adding a story mode at some point, like a campaign structure.
Okay.
I don't know when, but that's apparently coming. And then presumably they're going to add more options in the general survival mode. I'm assuming they're probably going to add more buildings and units and stuff, but honestly, I don't think the game even needs it. I think it's $25 right now.
You don't think it needs more units or the story mode? More
units and stuff. I'm curious to see what the story mode would look like.
Okay.
But I think the survival mode as it stands, it works really well. It doesn't have too much stuff in it to be confusing or complicated. It's very straightforward, very simple. And it doesn't have, I haven't had any issues with bugs or performance or anything. Like, it feels very very well made.
Yeah, when I was watching I first saw this game watching the video Giant Bomb did on it. And I watch a lot of their quick looks and unfinished and those kind of things. And this is one of the rare one. And a lot of times I'm like, oh, whatever. It's kind of background noise. And this was one that was this looks really good right now, even though it's early access. And it was kind of enthralling just to watch them, watch Vinny fight off all that stuff.
Honestly, if this wasn't labeled as early access and they just said this is the whole game for $20 or $25, I would be like, yeah, that feels like a done game.
Yeah, it seemed pretty polished.
Yeah.
For me, I mean, I still plan on waiting. A story mode is something I would prefer to have.
Yeah, and that's totally fair.
If nothing else, but
have you survived?
So there are a couple of difficulty sliders that you can use. The default mode is very, very difficult.
Right.
So I have not done that. Basically, the two main difficulty sliders you can do is number of zombies and the amount of time you have to survive.
Is one of the options for number of zombies billions?
I don't think they call it that. I don't remember, actually.
Missed opportunity.
Yeah.
That's funny.
But I did survive one on a lower zombie difficulty, but with the standard time difficulty.
Gotcha.
Okay. And that was difficult in and of itself. It took me a couple of tries. Had a couple of really close calls. You get these points where, like I was saying earlier, like you have to make a split-second decision about whether to sacrifice a whole area of your base that you've like spent all this time thinking about and constructing very carefully, and it's like, do I pull the trigger and like destroy all this hard work and try to run back to the next wall?
Yeah. How does it handle saving?
It is, I think it just is auto-saving constantly. I don't think you can roll back.
So you
at
can't.
All.
All right. I just had the thought of, can you save scum it?
I do not think you can save scum it.
Okay.
And then I had a couple of points, and this is another thing I like about the infection mechanic with the buildings. I had a couple of points where a neighborhood would get infected because I didn't respond quick enough, but I was able to hold them within that area. So like, since they were in sort of an enclosed area surrounded by walls, I was able to like bring everything from the rest of my base to like fight them off in that area. And so then it was like this like long drawn out fight in an infected neighborhood, trying to like clean it out so that I could repair the buildings. It was like a lot of really cool close calls happen in that game.
Yeah. It sounds cool because it sounds like they've kept it simple but and intuitive, but those mechanics are dynamic enough to create a lot of interest, like cool situations.
Yeah. And when you first start, you will definitely be like, oh, I got this. This isn't that bad. And then realize 5 minutes later that you made a huge mistake, and then you have to start over because you just let the zombies in.
Don't let the zombies in.
Don't let the zombies in.
This has not gone well.
That's the alternate title for this game. Don't let the zombies in. But anyway, the game's great. I want to play more of it, but I'll probably wait to see what their next big updates are before I play a lot more of it.
Yeah, that sounds neat. Is there co-op multiplayer online?
No, I don't think so. I don't know if that's in their plans or not.
That's one of those things I'll probably be watching to see if they end up adding that.
Yeah.
But, it sounds neat enough as is.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you've been playing that, but you've also been playing some of that Monster Hunter. Several other people have too, so we're going to call this the Monster Hunter block.
Yeah.
Nate, why don't you go ahead and can kick us off with it?
All right, so Monster Hunter World is the game.
It's a world of monster hunters.
World of Monster Hunters out on consoles. This is my first Monster Hunter game, so I've had to learn a lot of what that game is about, which is a lot of confusing menus and systems they don't fully explain.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious how, because I played Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate before, and that game was confusing when I started it, but I've heard, and from what I can tell, Monster Hunter World seems less confusing, but I am curious how confusing it was being your first Monster Hunter game.
Yeah, it's like not any one thing is like incredibly confusing. It's just like the number of things that are a little weird or they don't explain. They just pile up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we were discussing it the other day, Flex, because I've been playing as well, and this is also my first Monster Hunter game, and like the main campaign in this game does tutorialize some of the basic stuff, but it's a game full of little optimizations. So even though they told me at the beginning of every quest, check the supply box, there's going to be rations and other useful doodads, like, you know, it wasn't until I got into the game and started using like really stamina heavy weapons that I realized, oh, okay, if you eat at the beginning of the mission, it raises your max stamina, which means you're going to get more mileage out of your bow or your dual blades or whatever. And, you know, to save you some time, they give you some free items at the beginning of every quest. So it's not like they didn't tell me that. It's just that, you know, when you jump in, when you jump in, you're sitting in this camp, and, you know, usually those item boxes, like if you're playing Vermintide or whatever, are just for changing equipment. So it's like, if you don't need it and you've played other games that do something similar, it's like, oh, okay, well, there's that. And then you run off and go hunt monsters.
Yeah.
So there's just tons and tons. Like the armor system, you know, it's sort of like Bloodborne in that whenever I'm looking at different equipment, it's like the base defense usually isn't that much higher. It's just like, you know, this piece of armor has +5 elemental resistance to fire and -10 to thunder. And it's like, then this other piece is basically the same armor, it's just reversed or whatever. You just do a lot of like twiddling, and then there's the whole armor skill system. There's just tons and tons of like these little details and micro optimizations and things like that don't really click.
Mm-hmm. And the whole thing of like when you first start the game, it's like, hey, which of these 14 completely different weapon types do you want to use?
Yeah.
Have fun.
Yeah. And the weapon, like, especially in the early hours, a lot of the crux of the game is the weapons, because there are 14 weapon categories and they all play very differently.
Right.
And I've heard so many stories over the years of like people picking up a Monster Hunter game, play it for a few hours and are hating it, and then they try a different weapon and then all of a sudden it clicks and they have that magic moment and they're like, oh, this is great. So the weapons play different enough that like they can drastically affect your play style and what's going to click with you and your enjoyment of it and all of that. And figuring out all of what works best for you is kind of a process, and because there's a lot of nuance to the weapons as well. Like it's almost like a borderline fighting game system with combos and like weird different mechanics, because all of the weapons have different mechanics that are kind of subtle in some ways, and figuring out all that stuff is a process. But I also find it kind of a fun process, because you're doing a lot of just testing things out and exploring options and that kind of stuff.
For sure.
Yeah, and that's one thing I've really been enjoying it. Like, and as you mentioned, you know, my first step was kind of testing out weapons, which I've gone through a handful now, and I'm starting to settle in on a few that I like: the bow, the dual blades, maybe the hammer. But I guess there's a lot of interesting things going on about that game. Like, you know, you talked about the combat, like people have compared it to Dark Souls, and I think that's somewhat accurate. You know, there's sort of a progression loop, and in some ways it might be like a traditional ARPG where it kind of helps to mainline things, but at the same time, because, you know, you kind of progress by doing you gain more equipment and stuff by doing side quests, but you also have a chance to kind of practice and kind of play around in these expeditions and these world spaces. Like, even if it's not strictly the best form of progression, sometimes I just enjoy like going out on random hunts for easier monsters just to try and practice like my weapon combos and like learn more about how to interact with all the game's different systems and try out, you know, new armor or whatever.
Right.
I've been like oddly enjoying just doing side stuff, even when, I mean, a lot of the side quests will, like, I don't know, they'll add ingredients to the canteen where you cook meals, or they'll unlock a different set of armor, or like a lot of the side quests will kind of lead to something around the periphery.
Right.
But a lot of the times they're not like very clearly, advancing anything, but I've still found myself enjoying doing them just to, kind of like Ryan said, to just have more time to fiddle with things and get used to things. And I feel like a lot of the enjoyment of that game is not actually built in, like, I mean, the story's so dumb that like, the draw is not like, oh, let me just progress through the story and get to the credits and be done. Like, a lot of the joy of that game is really much just kind of like living in the moment, so to speak, and being like, all right, I'm fiddling with this weapon and I'm enjoying this process of getting better at this and practicing. And more importantly, I'm enjoying the process of actually fighting this monster, because this is freaking rad.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think the core loop of Monster Hunter World is just very strong. Being able to like go back and forth between hunting and upgrading and like figuring out what you want to do next, and like seeking out specific monsters, and then the combat just feels really good. And then you immediately follow that up by starting the loop over with, going back to camp and then crafting and looking through your stuff again. And I just think every piece of the loop feels really good. They don't make any part of it feel like time wasted, even though it does all take a lot of time.
Yeah.
Right.
It's Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so like just echo Nate's point. Yeah, like I think the combat feels good, and it's also neat that like all the weapons feel very different to play. So like I've been playing mostly the charge blade and the bow, and I think both of those feel good to play, but they also feel very different.
Yeah.
And it is a very actiony game, and I think the monsters themselves are fun to fight as well. So like all of the monsters are very different fights. Like they have different strengths and weaknesses. They have different kind of moves you have to worry about, and like they're often take place in different environments, which the way fights flow through the environments and the kind of shenanigans that can happen when that's going on is a whole nother thing that's really interesting.
Yeah, that was actually something I was wanting to bring up, is that in some ways, like Monster Hunter feels like you're, in addition to all this like combat layer, it feels like when you're going on a hunt or an expedition, it almost feels like you're stepping into like an environmental simulator. Because I mean, it's a game and you can see some of the pieces, but at the same time, like sometimes crazy things just happen that like you won't predict. So you'll be fighting this really big, tough monster, and it'll start, you'll do some damage to it, so it'll start running away when you have to chase it, and then it'll run into like some other big monster, and like they'll start fighting, and then you like catch up, and maybe they both turn to you, or maybe some other monster shows up. Like we were doing a co-op hunt yesterday with the three of us, and we had 2 targets. So we ran into one and chased it off, and then the other one literally walked up as that. So then we're like, okay, well, should we go after it or should we fight it? And it's like, well, let's fight this guy. He's here. So we start fighting him, and then he runs off in the same direction as the first monster. So we go chase him. And like they run into each other, and then like a third monster shows up, and we're like, I don't even know what to do anymore.
It's a monster party.
Yeah. Like, we're all kind of sitting there. It's like, do we want to get in the middle of this?
Yeah,
it was a thing.
Yep.
Yeah, it's crazy the way some of that stuff happens, and yeah, like that was the first time I'd ever seen. We've seen Nate and I played a bunch last weekend, and we saw 2 monsters together a lot, and we saw them fighting each other, which a lot of times the animations for that can be really cool. Like we saw this T-Rex looking thing, the Anjanath, like basically pick up this like lizardy thing, like pick him up in his mouth, like hold it straight up in the air and start like shaking back and forth, like, a dog chewing on a dog toy or something. And it's like, and then just like flings him down, and like you see a huge damage number pop up on it. Yeah, but like last night was the first time we saw 3 monsters at once, and that got real gnarly.
Yeah.
And then we died.
Yeah. Yeah, and just I was just going to say, and just in addition, it's not just monsters fighting each other, but you have like, you have environmental effects like paralysis, burning. Like I think you guys said you saw a dam break once and like wash away like some giant pterodactyl monster.
So this was right before Ryan got on. Nate and I were doing, or as he got on, we were in the middle of a quest, and we were fighting a Rathian, which is kind of, it's kind of a winged dragon thing. And apparently it, like, as it was attacking us, it broke this dam, and this water just started gushing, and the Rathian like got caught in the stream.
Like washed down river.
Yeah, he's like struggling in this like gushing river, and we just see him like get washed over the side of a cliff. It was great.
Yep, and so your hunter can go sliding off of slopes and like falling off of cliffs. Like just all this crazy stuff can happen while you're playing that game. It creates a lot of magical moments. Sometimes you're not always in control of those moments, but some crazy things can happen.
So it's fun.
Yeah, it's fun stuff, and I think the co-op, like there are a lot of. I've griped about some of the connectivity stuff, but like I think. That was the first time we had done 3-player hunts, and I'm curious to do more 3 and 4-player stuff, because especially in the late game, because I have a feeling like once you get to the really tough monsters, there would be like a lot of teamwork and stuff, because like Nate's been playing with the insect glaive a lot.
Yeah, which glaive for life.
Which is also super rad to watch, because he's like... So the insect glaive is like this like giant staff or something, and like basically you're...
the Darth Maul lightsaber of fantasy weapons.
Yeah, basically. And like basically a lot of Nate's combos are initiated by him basically planting the pole into the ground and then like kicking himself up into the air, like vaulting himself into the air, and then he's doing all these like air dashes and flips and stuff. So like if I'm playing with the bow and like just sitting back shooting or something, I'm just seeing Nate literally just like flipping around in the air constantly, and it looks freaking rad. But like one thing he does is like he mounts the monsters doing that, and then he knocks them down, and then that opens it up for like someone else to land big hits. So like there can definitely be like some synergy between some of the weapons, because some weapons are better at knocking down than others, and then you have some weapons that can do like status buffs for the party or all sorts of different
really
things.
big bursts of damage. Some of the weapons are just good at like hitting really hard once every few minutes.
Yep. And you have some weapons like the great. So yeah, like the charge blade is a good example of a burst weapon Nate was talking about. And then you have some like the great sword, which are like very slow, deliberate hits. And so like there's just a bunch of different styles that I could see in a big group could like synergize really well.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it sounds like that they've at least made it a bit more accessible for people who don't have the long history of that franchise, which is a very complicated thing to sort of try to get into, I think, at this point. But it sounds like they've done a good job with that.
Yeah, it feels like they've... Oh, go ahead, Nate.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say it feels just accessible enough now. Like, not everything is perfect. They definitely don't explain everything, and some of the online stuff doesn't work as well as it should. But it feels like just that bar is lowered just enough where a lot of people who haven't gotten into it before can get into it a lot easier now.
Okay.
Yeah, it feels like they've done a good number of refinements over the years, because this franchise has been around like, I don't know, 15 years or something at this point. Because I played Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, and even just coming from that game, it's like all right, so pickaxe for mining, bug net for catching bugs, and there was one other thing. Oh, the
fishing or
whetstones for sharpening your weapon. All of those were things that before you had to find ingredients for and craft. And now you just have infinite uses of all of those.
That does sound better.
Yeah, so it's...
Oh boy, yeah. I would not.
It's just little tweaks like that. Or the way now when you pick up an herb, it just auto crafts a potion. It's like before you had to go into the menu and do that every time. Or before you had to buy or craft paintballs, and you had to throw paintballs on the monsters to track them, whereas now you just trigger, footprints as you're walking around, and that tracks them. So it's a bunch of like little streamlining stuff.
Okay.
That adds up, and it feels a lot smoother to play.
Cool.
And there's probably more streamlining they could do too.
Yeah.
All right.
The last thing I wanted to say, sorry. One thing I really appreciate about this game. I've mostly enjoyed a lot of the stuff we've been talking about. Like, I think the combat feels good and the monsters are fun to fight. But I'm someone who's not like, I don't normally like grinding.
Yeah.
And one thing I really appreciate about this game is it's very clear about the parts you need and how to get them. So like, if there's a specific weapon I want to make, it's like, oh, I want to make this fire bow, and that's made with Anjanath parts. I don't remember if this is accurate or not, but just for the sake of argument, and it's like, all right, that means I need these Anjanath parts, which means to get them, I need to go hunt an Anjanath, and I can very easily just go pick something that has an Anjanath in it and go do it. It's like, and the parts, from what I've played so far, at least, the parts have pretty good drop rate. So like, you normally won't have to do a monster, or at least thus far, I have not had to like hunt a monster more than once or twice to get something specific I want. So it's like very targeted grinding. So there's no like big question marks of like, oh, what's the drop rate on this? Like, how many times am I going to have to do this? Like, it's just like, nope, I'm just going to go do this thing and get the parts I need, and then I'm done.
Yeah. I also think there's something like subtly way better about that grinding and loot gathering in Monster Hunter versus other games that rely a lot on loot. And part of it is what you're talking about, where it's very targeted and you know what you're going for. So I think like linking the equipment you're going for to like, okay, then I'm going to go and set this quest for myself and gear up for this specific thing and go do it, and I can expect those rewards, versus like, a Diablo or a Destiny or a Borderlands, where it's like, well, I'm just going to find the place or the mission that has the best drops and run it over and over and hope that the good stuff falls out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a subtly different thing, but it feels a lot smoother to me when I'm doing it. And it makes it feel, and it's part of it also just comes from the way the upgrades are. Like, this is all gear based, and it's all from getting parts to craft gear instead of just finding, like in those examples you mentioned, it's like a Diablo or a Destiny or whatever. It's the weapon itself that drops, not the parts.
Right. Yes.
And those weapons can drop anywhere, so it's not like tied. So like this, like the parts are very, it's like, all right, Rathian parts come from a Rathian. Like I know where those come from, and that makes the Rathian armor set or whatever.
Yeah.
And
that makes it so that you're really learning all the different monsters. Like the first time you meet a new monster, that's just like the handshake. That's the introduction. And then like you're going to have a long tail relationship with that monster as you continue on, like trying to upgrade and stuff, where you learn more about it and you track it and increase your research on it so that you know which parts can be broken and what it's weak to and what it drops and all of that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a cool game.
Yep.
Well, and I think we'll probably end up talking about it. Sounds like at least a couple of times. Hopefully, it won't turn into one of our games that we talk about for a year, like we did for Persona 5.
It's a long game.
We'll probably be talking about it most of the year.
So I'm going to go ahead and unilaterally end the Monster Hunter block for episode 31. Probably will make a return for episode 32. Nate, I know that you have to go ahead and run, so happy trails.
I'm going to head out of here.
And we'll see you on the next episode. And we're gonna throw it over to Mr. Ryan, who's been playing a bunch of stuff, but we had a couple of special requests for him. So why don't you take it away, Ryan?
Yeah, well, over the past month, I missed our last podcast, and where I have taken a break from WoW, I guess I've had a chance to really attack my single player backlog. So getting that down to about 24 plus a few more wish list items. Pretty happy to not have like 80 games that I want to play, but yeah, I have been playing a lot of single player games, and the games that I think we were going to focus on were Alan Wake and Grim Dawn.
Yeah. At the same time, I mean, if there's something that like you are specifically interested in talking about, I'd be down for hearing that about it too. But I was interested specifically in those two.
Well, there are varying degrees of things. I guess it's hard to talk about everything. So those are definitely interesting games to speak about. I guess I will start with Alan Wake. Let me think here. So Alan Wake was a game I did enjoy. I think it was like an Xbox 360, maybe like a first party or Microsoft title.
I think they published it. It's a Remedy title.
Okay.
Who did like Max Payne and other stuff.
Quantum Break.
There you go, Quantum Break.
Okay, yeah. I didn't play it back then. But I got it either really cheap or maybe even free. I think they gave it away for free not that long ago.
Because
music licenses were running out, I think.
Yeah, it was such a weird situation. They can't sell that game anymore because of music license. So I think like before they had to take it down, they were just giving it away for either free or dirt cheap.
No, I'm pretty sure it was like just free on Steam. It's like, hey, just go out of your library, run, and they did that for I think it was an entire weekend, if my memory serves right.
Yeah, it was weird.
It was something like that, but yeah, that is a cool game. That was as I mentioned, I've been playing a lot of games to varying degrees of interest. So, some I've been sitting down and it's just kind of like, not really feeling it. But Alan Wake, actually, I was pleasantly surprised that it grabbed me. And the other thing too is, I'm not really much of a horror game kind of guy, which it's more of a thriller, I guess. They've pasted it, but games that are very psychological, very dark, like those tend to turn me off a little bit. Usually not super my cup of tea. So, it was kind of cool to see Alan Wake, kind of catch my interest, but it does a couple things really well, or pretty well that I enjoyed. So it's, in terms of story, I think they have like a really interesting plot line, where, you're like this famous writer, Alan Wake, who's taking a vacation in like, is it Oregon? or it's
Bright Falls, or is that a different game?
No, Bright Falls sounds familiar. I think that may be the name of the town. It's like in around the Rockies.
Bright Falls is the show, I think.
Okay,
the show
that's like the Twilight Zone.
It does say it's the setting for Alan Wake. I don't know. I think that's right.
So yeah, well, you're taking this vacation. So Alan Wake, you're this famous writer. Like you mostly write, I think, horror or whatever, and like, but you've been having trouble writing lately, like having nightmares or whatever. So you take this vacation in this town, and then like weird supernatural stuff starts happening, and a lot of it is themed around light and darkness. And they do a good job in the storytelling. Like, you know, you show up in this town and it's just, you know, when you first show up, there's nothing particularly weird or sinister about it. Like you talk with one of the locals who's like, you know, the radio broadcast guy, and he's trying to get you to do an interview, and like, you know, your agent is calling you and like kind of harassing you, and
oh yeah, yes.
They just like they put a lot of character into a lot of those moments. But then, you know, you go to this cabin, and while you're in this like diner to meet the person who's supposed to give you the keys, like, you know, there's this lady who's like afraid, there's a light out, and there's this lady who's like, oh, you can't go into the dark. Like, it's dangerous in the dark. And you're like, you know, you're this writer from New York. You're like, okay, that's nice. Like, is this guy in the bathroom over here? I need to go, you know, I need to get these keys. And like this very strange dark lady like meets you. And like, you know, strange things start happening. And then when you get to the gameplay, I won't spell everything out, because just in case anyone ever wanted to play it again or whatever. But when you get to the gameplay, it kind of has this theme of light and shadow. So like a lot of the enemies in that game are like part of this darkness. They're called the Taken or whatever, but like they look like the locals, you know, like lumberjacks or hikers or, you know, rednecks, whatever, like, but they're like shrouded in darkness. So in order to fight them, you have to use things like, a lot of times you have a flashlight and a pistol. So it's a third person shooter. And there were times where some of that gameplay, I think they overused it a little bit, but it was still kind of interesting enough where you would have to like shine this flashlight on these enemies to kind of break off the shroud of darkness before you could do anything with them. And you know, the game gives you like, since light is a weapon, the game gives you different types of light sources. Like you'll have flares or flare guns or like flashbang grenades, like, which end up becoming very powerful weapons. Or, you know, you'll be in this place where there's like a floodlight, and you can like turn it around and like use it to kind of like push back the enemies or stun them, or like sometimes just straight up kill them with this like bright light. So it does some really interesting things. I mean, the controls themselves are a little bit clunky, and I think it plays in like 5 chapters, and by the 5th chapter, I was a little bit like, okay, you know, they really didn't, you know, it was, by that time, it's like, because they mix it up a little bit during the game, but really the core gameplay stays the same. They just kind of change the set pieces. So by the 5th chapter, it felt a little bit long in the tooth, but just the way it kind of matched the story and the way the storytelling was so good throughout, I found myself enjoying it.
I also think that there are a little bit of survival horror elements in it, in terms of like getting those flares and getting the flashbangs, and like when should you use them, you know. And of course, if it's in the easier sections, you might kind of build up a little bit of a surplus. But I think it's kind of interesting to decide like when you want to use those, because, you know, like you said, the flashbang grenades are so powerful. So it's kind of like, well, ugh, do I really want to get into this right now, or do I want to waste it on these guys or whatever? And then the other piece I think is kind of interesting about it is that slow motion dodge that you have. So I think between trying to decide what I needed to use and trying to time that slow motion dodge whenever I had like an axe flying at me or some guy trying to hit me, like I guess that I felt like that kind of kept it engaging. But I have heard I've heard complaints of people saying that they felt like there should have been more like enemy diversity, for instance. Like,
yeah, and I was going to jump in and say that like I echo that complaint with the enemy diversity, because when I was playing through it, I did enjoy the game. I finished it, but like I had a couple of complaints, and that was one of them. Was I wish that there was just, and it doesn't have to be like 10 times more, but at least a couple of different varieties. That was one of the little notes that I had jotted down whenever I did my playthrough of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's amazing how little they changed the core like flashlight and gun combat and managed to make it last for probably a good 3 or 4 chapters. Like, but I do agree, like in terms of enemy diversity, and because I feel like there are so many things they could have done with that theme of light and darkness, and you could see them playing around, like when you're fighting off a horde at like a rock concert, and like there are like sparklers and flares coming up, like they do some fun things with the set pieces, but pretty much it's like the same enemies like coming at you, and you're still using basically like a flashlight and gun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One of the pieces that I really liked about the game, which is not a thing I notice all the time, is they did an excellent job with the music. I thought it was really incredible for what that game was. There's actually, if you look on Spotify, one of the artists that they have is the Old Gods of Asgard, and they actually just like wrote and recorded those songs just for the game. I don't know who the original band was, but they called it Old Gods of Asgard, and that is some really good music. Even though it's sort of just kind of like written on the side, and then kind of put into the game kind of like as an afterthought. But if the afterthought music is that good, then I thought all of the other stuff was just like that much better. Because I did notice that several times when I was playing through. It's like, yeah, this is cool. This definitely fits in with what they're doing here. So I was pretty impressed with that particular piece of it.
I have an important question for Ryan. How many thermoses did you get?
I was thinking of bringing that up myself.
Let me think here. Maybe 30 or so.
All right.
So
all right.
You were well caffeinated.
Yeah, I mean, I if I saw one, I would usually go pick it up, but I didn't find myself, especially,
Yeah. I think there's actually, I mean, viewers can't, our listeners can't see this, but I think there's actually one behind Barry in the screenshot that Paul just posted.
There is. There is.
There is. It's in the window.
It's in the window. And to be fair, whenever that game came out, collectibles were all the rage in the Xbox 360 achievement era. So.
Achievements.
One of my lasting I mean, I enjoyed Alan Wake, but one of my lasting memories of it is it was like, that's the game I always think of as like the peak of like pointless collectibles for achievements, because like with Thermos, like none of them did anything. It's not like you were collecting upgrade points or like anything to trade in for a reward. Like there was no gameplay incentive to pick up any of this stuff. Or especially at least the thermoses, but like, yep, they were in there. You got achievements if you got them all, and that was about it.
Pages, and they could give you a little bit of a hint as to like just some story shades and stuff. But you were right. I mean, the thermoses is really no purpose at all.
Yeah.
Other than. I mean, you are a writer, right? You need your thermoses of coffee.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like the.
How else are you going to get over this writer's block with 60 thermoses of coffee?
Just copious amounts of stimulants. Maybe you should try cocaine if you need that much caffeine. I'm just saying.
Well, the funny thing is, you say that, but I think Alan Wake is roughly I think he's sort of a Stephen King-esque writer, and there were definitely some years where Stephen King was heavily addicted to cocaine.
Oh yeah. That's kind of what I was thinking about whenever I said that.
Oh, it's funny you say that too, because there's this character who shows up, and maybe his story is in the manuscripts because I never really understood him, but there's this like FBI agent who really hates Alan Wake's guts, and every time he shows up, he yells like some author's name. So he's like, it's like, I've got you now, Stephen King.
Yeah,
I remember that.
Yeah, they all say like these. They're sort of like demented versions of like random people. Like the log cutter guy. He's like, I need to make the lumber.
That was the other thing I wanted to ask is like, did you like because one of the things I really liked about Alan Wake is just the goofy crap that the enemies will say. Like I posted a video of them saying something about omega-3 fatty acids are good for your heart.
The omega-3 fatty acids is probably the one I heard the most.
Yeah. And I remember there being some other line about like the number of cows in the world or something like that.
I just remember like one of them yelling at me to always eat vegetables.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of really random stuff like that, and it cracked me up all the time because it's a really goofy component of this game that's otherwise like kind of self-serious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I liked it. So Ryan, are you thinking that you're going to go on and play American Nightmare, or was that good enough for you?
No, I talked to Will about it, and it sounded like it was kind of more of the same, which, again, I like the game kind of for its setting and for its kind of initial ideas with the gameplay. And I thought they held up fairly well, but again, after 3 or 4 chapters, it was like, I'll finish this out, but I don't really need more of this.
And I'm probably the biggest Alan Wake fan in the bunch, and I think if I didn't recommend it or think it was good, then I doubt Ryan will.
I really liked what they did with the it's not really a spoiler, the time loop stuff in American Nightmare. I actually really enjoyed that a lot. I did not regret playing through that one, and they had that really cool musical track at the very beginning. It was awesome.
Yeah, I sent Ryan that scene because I felt like that was all he really needed.
Well, that's probably the best scene in the game, so that's probably fair. I'm there with you.
Yeah, and so for our listeners, that track is Clubfoot by a band called Kasabian.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to rock out,
it's real good. It's real good. I don't know if there's anything else that I really wanted to say about Alan Wake. Was that pretty much all that you want to talk about, Ryan, or did you have some other thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, I think that is an exhaustive.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you got to experience it. It's one of my favies.
Yeah, it's good. It's real good.
It's pretty fun.
All right, and the other game that you want to talk about with us.
Yeah, Grim Dawn.
Yeah.
So my brother and I, we've been keeping kind of a 2-player run going for probably the past year or so. He's probably, I guess, been freed up a little bit more. And we were doing the World of Warcraft for a while, which we've talked about off and on, playing Legion. And we had done some of the raiding, like Antorus. We had cleared that on the normal difficulty, and we were looking at it, and it's like, okay, well, they've announced the expansion. Like, we don't really want to get into a guild and start committing to doing the heroic or mythic difficulties. Like, that's just we don't really have the time or wherewithal to do that. So it's like, do we want to keep kind of poking around with WoW or just put it down until Battle for Azeroth? So that's kind of what we decided to do. And we were looking at some of the things we could play in the interim, and we ended up settling on Grim Dawn. And I don't know if we had talked about this on ATACS before, but we bought it without the expansion. The expansion Ashes of Malmuth came out, I think, November or December last year. So you can find the base game on sale for $3, but the expansion was still $15. So, we were like, okay, well, let's just do the base game and see if we like it, and then we can decide if we want to go with the expansion, which I don't think that was the best choice, unfortunately. I don't know. Maybe it's just, I don't know if the expansion really changes that much. It's hard to tell, but what we ended up doing when we did our first playthrough was we ended up playing it on the normal difficulty, which I think is sort of like easy. So one of the things the game does that's not intuitive is the normal difficulty has an option called veteran, which is not enabled by default. And we ended up playing it through on that difficulty, and like it makes the game easier, but it kind of slows the progression loop. And you know, this is an ARPG, so like if you're not progressing quickly, like it's not that interesting.
Kind of slog.
Yeah, it's kind of a slog. Yeah, like Will said. So
we got to the end of the campaign, like the regular campaign on that normal.
The Ligorian.
Yeah, and punch Cthulhu in the face.
Nice. That Cthulhu always had it coming.
And we kind of set back, and it's like, man, are we really feeling like going all the way to level 85 like this? So we kind of chewed on it, and we're like, okay, well, let's pick up the expansion. Like the new classes look cool. You know, people say they love this game for ARPGs, and we'll try it on veteran. And
do people say that?
What's that?
I'm just being stupid. So do people say that? I say that as I have 177 hours in Grim Dawn.
Yeah, I mean, people basically say, like, outside of Diablo, like, this is the ARPG to play. Like, if you look on forums, I mean, maybe I'm just reading the fanboys' notes.
Oh, I'm just messing with you because I'm in that camp.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the thing is, and so we've enjoyed this. We've been playing the new classes. My brother's a necromancer, a Kabbalist, and I am an inquisitor, a purifier. And, you know, turning it on veteran, like we re-rolled from scratch, but what we did was we turned it on veteran and we started mainlining it, and the progression curve just went way up. And the new classes are fun to play. Like, we just finished the first campaign and started on Elite, and we finished the DLC campaign as well. So that curve's has been a lot better. Like, the progression's been more interesting. Like, and you know, it slows down in Elite, so we'll see how that goes. But it's interesting though. Like, it was a little tough to put my finger on it. Obviously, I think playing it on normal difficulty was kind of a bad way to go, but also I was just like, you know, why did I have a lot of fun with Diablo and I'm not having a lot of fun with Grim Dawn? And I think those two games are a little different in certain ways. Like, one of the things I noticed when I played like Diablo 3 is that it has a very like action oriented, I feel like, gameplay loop. Maybe that depends on the character, but like, I remember, you know, obviously Grim Dawn has a crazy level of customization, sort of like Titan Quest did. I guess that developer, Crate Entertainment, like that's kind of their claim to fame, is just all those different customization options they offer. But and I like some of that, but you know, when I remember when I played Diablo, like the thing that I thought was so cool about that is, you know, I was playing a demon hunter, and like I would like, you know, be dropping traps and like doing dodge rolls and like using gadgets. It's just like all this very like refined action loop that kind of clicks together really well. And you know, Grim Dawn has maybe a little of that, but I don't think its focus is nearly as much on its action like gameplay. Like, there are just tons of different spells, and like sometimes the animations are like not that satisfying, or you know, like the spell casts are just they end up, for whatever reason, like they just don't end up sometimes being as visceral, or like at least not in some of the builds and options that you do.
Yeah, I can 100% agree with that. Like, I think it depends on kind of, you know, Flex and I have been kind of talking a little bit outside of the podcast about, what we call, or at least what are referred to as the, core play aesthetics, kind of like the reasons why you play the games you do. And, Diablo definitely, I remember even Diablo 3 without the expansion, I remember playing this monk that had this like tornado ability where he would spin around and all the enemies would kind of like collapse into him. And there was something that was like really satisfying about like hitting that move and having him spin around, and I think when you talk about kind of that customization aspect, like when I played Diablo 3, especially prior to the expansion, I felt like there was no real investment in my build. It was like if I built a monk, basically the only difference in my monk was kind of how I played it. Like I didn't really feel like there were really many build decisions I could make. So it was like once you made one monk, then you pretty much had a monk. Whereas like, you could play two different classes in Grim Dawn where you could play the same class twice and they could end up using completely different skills and having completely different gear.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I think it just kind of depends on what you kind of are going in for. But I mean, you're definitely right that there's a certain visceral level to the gameplay in Diablo 3 that Grim Dawn doesn't have.
Yeah, and I even noticed that because I've not been like a huge, like I've kind of been in and out of a lot of these kind of games, and I ended up really liking Diablo 3, and at the time I was like, why do I like this more than a lot of the other ones? And that was kind of the conclusion I came to, is like the action of it, like it feels snappier, more responsive, and it, the animations and everything looks more visceral and more responsive, and it lines up with like the inputs you're doing. And like, I mean, even though you're, with mouse and keyboard, like it's like, and like the perspective of Diablo 3, like it doesn't look like it should be like a snappy action game, but it still plays very well. And I remember around that time we played Path of Exile, and like the difference between how those felt playing them was very different. But then Path of Exile could have more build options, sound similar to what...
It's more of the other school.
Yeah. And it's also something I've been thinking about when playing Monster Hunter, because like Monster Hunter doesn't have nearly as many build options either. And it doesn't even have like, you don't even gain experience or like have skill trees. It's just what gear you put on. But then its action does feel really snappy. So I think I've found myself leaning more towards like the Diablo 3 or Monster Hunter like action style. But
yeah, and that's definitely that's certainly understandable.
Yeah, but it is cool and interesting to like see the different styles of these things, because like I could totally see the appeal of the Grim Dawn or Path of Exile mold, where it's like all of it is in like planning out these complicated builds where there's so many choices and variants between the classes and builds.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just add to that to say, unless it's slowed down somewhat, like they give you fewer points to invest in things like that past level 50. But I think, what my brother and I will probably be going for, unless it just kind of really slows down and turns into a slog, is that their highest difficulty, the ultimate difficulty, is supposed to be really challenging. And I guess, to kind of segue off of what we were talking about, like I've gotten to a point where I'm kind of a net decker on builds, because like, especially when a game's inflexible, like as much fun as it is to look at the different skills and things like that, like there are viable and non-viable skills at that top level difficulty, and there are optimal points to put in. And like, I don't want to do the math for all that stuff, and I don't want to do a lot of the experimentation for that stuff, especially if it's like costly to reset your points, or like in some cases you can totally like ruin your build. Which I think Grim Dawn has backed off of that a little bit, but it's still like, your class choices are set. Like I think your attribute choices used to be set. Like, so it's the kind of thing where the customization is interesting, but sometimes it's not. And I think, it'll be fun to see if we can take our builds that we've chosen, which are mostly based off online builds, and see if, with the right gear and stuff, we can make it through that top level difficulty. So that'll be our goal. But I do think I probably favor that more like snappy, actiony, like flexible style with some customization. I mean, Diablo does have its own options. Like,
and I will say that I screwed up myself in other ARPGs much more than I have in Grim Dawn. I remember having a build in Diablo 2. Paul probably remembers this build where I was trying to make basically a flamethrower sorceress, and she would try and blow fire, and eventually I got it to where she could blow fire across the entire length of the screen, but it still didn't do enough damage to be viable, so she became a mule. And then, which in ARPG terms means that she holds the items that you're saving for your other characters. In Titan Quest, I made a poison bomb rogue that threw out these little bombs that let out poison and shrapnel, and that was terrible because poison damage didn't work against, and bleeding damage didn't work against skeletons. But I will say in Grim Dawn, I just picked the mortar randomly. There's a skill that the Demolitionist has where she drops a mortar down and it just shoots giant mortars on the screen. And then my friend Tim picked a necromancer, like a summoner build, and we were able to get through that highest difficulty with those builds, just kind of playing it the right way and just sort of getting the right gear and putting our points in the right places. So I do feel like and it could very well be possible to screw yourself in Grim Dawn, but I will say that that's not something I've had to deal with, fortunately enough.
Yeah, and I, thinking back, because I played Grim Dawn for just a little bit, and thinking back to the Diablo 2 stuff. Number one, blowing fire across a 640 by 480 screen. Maybe it's not as far as you think, but anyway.
Hey.
No,
ouch!
I'm just kidding. That was. Sort of to Ryan's point, that's kind of where I fall on that spectrum, is whenever I see just the not necessarily overwhelming, but just I see all of those skills and I start doing all the permutations of how many points here and there. It's I just want to know what's the best to make the numbers biggest, and then I'll just go Google it, and then that kind of takes away a lot of what you're supposed to be doing in the game, which is why I do tend to gravitate towards Diablo 3, which I've put 40, 100 bajillion hours in, because you can just swap that over and fiddle with this, fiddle with that, and yeah, sure, you can go and you can find an optimized build, but it's not like it's something that you couldn't figure out yourself without spreadsheets and calculators and things like that. So I definitely fall a little more on the Diablo 3 side of the action also, RPG sort of thing.
It does make me wonder, why a game couldn't do both. Because I find the idea of, these big, complicated skill trees and stuff kind of interesting. But for me, it's more of just, if the moment-to-moment action is not satisfying, and that's something you're going to be doing a lot of, then, that's hard to buckle up for dozens of hours. So I wonder... I was trying to think, and I can't think of a great example of, here's great feeling action and, a whole lot of, build flexibility.
Yeah, I think Path of Exile feels better than it once did. It still is nowhere near the level of Diablo 3, but I do think they've worked on the animations over the past 2 or 3 years since we played it.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Well, and I mean, I was kind of wondering the same with Grim Dawn. And I mean, it's not like every skill feels bad. It's just that it's there are 2 or 3 skills that feel really great, and then everything else feels kind of meh. And I mean, Diablo has a little bit of that, but a lot less of it, I feel like. And I think it's just because there are so many skills, because, there are 8 different classes that can be combined. And I'm looking at the Demolitionist, and he has the mortar trap, this mine, and these different grenades, and and that's just one class, that has 10 to 12 optional casting abilities. And it's I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 of those feels kind of good, and everything else just feels kind of meh.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so Brian, I know that you've played several other things. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we go ahead and wrap up this episode?
No, I think that's good for me. I mean, I think I will spare you all a monologue.
Well, there's always the Ryan block for episode 32 if you change your mind. So, well, speaking of, what do you have next on your plate that you're planning on playing, Ryan?
Do we have a Will section in here?
Oh, did I miss Will?
I haven't said anything, but I have been talking about Alan Wake and Grim Dawn with Ryan.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry, Will. I was just about to skip you and close out the episode. My bad.
You know,
I'm sorry, baby. Good catch, Flex. Anyway, carry on as you were. What you been playing, Will?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask Ryan what he was going to play next. I mean,
I was going to go through the episode closeout, but I forgot.
To be fair for our listeners, we usually have a little bit of pre-discussion to talk about, which of the 50 games Will has played that he's going to talk about, and I think we missed that.
Yeah, there's not anything in the chat to.
Will is kind of quiet.
I want to hear about game number 37.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
That's indie game number 427.
So the two games, I'm going to spend probably most of my time talking about Jydge and Hellblade. But there were two games that I thought would be interesting to mention, just as a quick little shout out situation. One is a game called A Normal Lost Phone, which is it's like a short, I guess primarily story-based game, but the premise is that you basically find a phone on the street, and initially, the only thing that you have are the text messages that are on the phone, and so you can kind of look through those text messages to kind of learn a little bit about who this person is and what they're about, and you can sort of use details from the text messages to connect to the city's Wi-Fi, which gives you access to kind of like the emails that person has. And so it's kind of an interesting thing. I can't say that it's like perfectly done, but it's a really interesting idea. So I just wanted to touch on that because I thought it was very different in terms of what you have.
So what kind of phone is it?
Well, it's like sort of a smartphone. I don't think it's like an Android or an iPhone or anything like that. But it's just got
a normal one.
Yeah, a normal one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
The other thing that I played that just had an interesting concept, and there have been two of these now, is a game called Emily is Away 2. 2 is TOO because apparently that's catching on. So if you have a game that's second in a sequence, instead of calling it the number 2, why not just say TOO? So
sure.
Bayonetta 2. Anyway, so Emily is Away 2 is basically about it's a game that also kind of has an interesting sort of conceit or premise. You are using, and they don't say it by name, but it's basically identical to America Online Instant Messenger. And so you've got like a buddy list, and people have these goofy profiles with song lyrics in them. And it really does a good job at like capturing this time in my life, at least, where I'd get home from school and, I'd go on there and try to flirt with ladies, and unsuccessfully most of the time. But
not all the time.
But not all the time. And it's an interesting sort of thing. So it kind of takes place in that sort of, high school kind of zone where you're talking to these people who you might be romantically involved with, or at least you might be interested in them, but you don't really know if you are, because it kind of depends on whether they are. And so neither one of you really wants to put yourself out there and actually say how you feel. And there's actually some tension created, and this is the dumbest way to create tension, but where you actually can't respond to people fast enough. So it's like, you have these two people who are like, dropping these really heavy subjects on you, like, well, my life is going so terrible. And then if you don't respond in a certain amount of time, they're like, are you there? I thought you cared. And it's kind of stupid. But at the same time, like, I feel like the nostalgia that it kind of creates and that interesting feeling is really well done. So neither of those are amazing, our favorites by any means, but I did think that conceptually they were pretty interesting and maybe worth mentioning.
Cool.
The two things that I've played recently that I think would be the most interesting to talk about, one is a game called Jydge. All right, and Judge is spelled Jydge, and it's not like licensed. It's not like a licensed product or anything. But basically, it's kind of this sort of successor in the spirit of Judge Dredd. So, like the Sylvester Stallone movie, which was then a Carl Urban movie, or there was also a game, and I think there's comics within this universe. But it's a top-down shooter, and you're in this sort of future-y cyberpunk world, and you're doing things like, taking out gang leaders and arresting folks and that sort of thing. But it really is kind of a William game in a lot of ways. So you've got a weapon that has it's got 3 different modifiers that you put on it, and your weapon is called the gavel, which is hilarious, and the front of it actually looks like a hammer. um but of course you've got all these different fire modes you can put on it, so you can put shotguns on it or sniper rifles on it, or like launchers, like plasma launchers, electricity mods, all kinds of different things. And that's actually one of the cool things about the movies in the universe too, is Judge Dredd has one gun that has all these different fire modes on it, so you can kind of switch from, like, bullet penetration to non-lethal to explosive to all these different, like cold. There are tons of different modes that this one gun has, so that's kind of part of that spirit. But you've got a lot of different mods, and the mods are actually very different. Like, some of them allow you to shoot through walls, some of them allow you to push enemies back or gain health when you hit an enemy. And at each level, you've got 3 different objectives. Of course, there's the main objective for the map, but then there's also kind of these bonus objectives. And to actually unlock more of the game, you have to actually beat these bonus objectives, which awards you with these yellow squares. And then each of the new maps takes a certain amount of yellow squares to actually access. So it kind of requires you to go back and do these optional objectives. And of course, to do these optional objectives, you're going to want to put different things on your gun to kind of make yourself well suited to deal with these types of issues. Additionally, your Judge himself, who's sort of robotic, he's got 4 pieces of cyberware that he can change. And those can do anything from making him invisible when he's not moving to making him be able to walk through walls just statically, which is pretty insane. There's one that allows him to spawn with like 2 gang members with him. So they're pretty diverse. They're not like meaningless changes. And you're going to want to try and figure out what combination of cyberware and gun modifiers you want to actually do these, complete the optional objectives in the maps to keep it going. And so I don't know what it is exactly that makes me like love this universe. It could just be, whenever I think of Judge Dredd, I think of Sylvester Stallone saying, I didn't break the law, I am the law, in his unique Sylvester Stallone way of saying it. But there's something about Judge Dredd that I think is just kind of fascinating. And if any listener wants to get exposure, I think one of the best representations I've seen of the world is actually not the Sylvester Stallone movie, but the Carl Urban one.
Yeah, that Carl Urban movie was really good.
Yeah, and it's got actually, it's great because if you watch Game of Thrones, then you know that Cersei is like one of the nastiest villains, and Cersei, the same actress, plays the villain in Dredd. So it's almost like you've got some residual hatred for this particular woman.
Yeah.
Just bringing it over from what a turd she is in Game of Thrones. So anyway, I don't know. Judge is a little bit under the radar. I don't know if questions about that particular game.
And it's remind me, it's like a top-down.
It's a top-down shooter, kind of like visually similar. Well, at least viewpoint similar to like Hotline Miami.
Yeah,
like
I got you. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of differences, but
yeah, but it's kind of got that same viewpoint.
Yeah. So do you? And I mean, it sounds like from you talking about it, most of your enjoyment is like just the feel of it and the mechanics and stuff. I mean, you also like the universe and stuff, but sounds like you just really like the way it plays.
Yeah, I think it's a good time. Like, I think it feels good to use the weapons, shoot the guns, to try and figure out exactly what sort of, how I can handle the different modifiers, So there are some modifiers that are like, don't get seen. And so if I'm trying not to get seen, then I'll put on the sniper modifier, I'll put on, I get the ability to shoot through walls. I'll put on a piece of cyberware that makes it so people can't see me unless I move. And then I sort of try and stay on the periphery and shoot through walls to take out all the enemies. There are certain maps that, of course, that's not going to be very effective. But like, I think it was just really interesting kind of mixing and matching these different options to sort of complete the objectives. But yeah, it's just fun to play. And it's got
how long?
It took me about 5 hours to beat.
Okay.
I could keep playing it, and to actually complete all the bonus objectives, but I just completed enough objectives to get me to the last mission, and then I completed the last mission. And so I didn't really because there's some that are complete some objective in 10 seconds, and that seemed like a little bit trial and error or something, and so I didn't really want to deal with that. One other thing about the game, and you kind of see this when you're looking at the credits, is there seem to be 50 tracks on the soundtrack. I mean, there's some insane amount of tracks, and they're all pretty good, and they kind of have this sort of crazy, upbeat cyberpunk feel. And so I was always super pumped to get into it, just let's do it, let's go and arrest some folks and show some gang members what it's for,
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah, I'm looking at the Steam page right now. It looks pretty neat.
Yeah, I thought it was fun.
Yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to kind of chat about, also you have a special weapon, and that can be a little different. I use stun grenades, but there's also all kinds of stuff, like rockets that heat seek and just tons of stuff. So I played Hellblade recently, and
Senua's Sacrifice.
There you go. And this was a really interesting thing for me because, first of all, I really liked Enslaved. I liked, and I played that DMC game, which is also Ninja Theory. That was pretty fun.
I like that a lot too.
And so, and I like this team. I remember, I felt like Enslaved was kind of underrated just because I thought the world was really interesting. I just thought what it was doing was interesting. It actually had a piece of DLC that was very different than the main game. That was very good.
Yeah.
It was called Pigsy's something, but it's a stealth cover bank game, which it was the main one's just sort of like an action melee combat situation. But anyway, and so I've been following this game, and in any game that really touches on mental health, I've been following this thing ever since it was announced, and I was actually super excited because I think it came out on August 4th or something, which is 2 days after my birthday. So I was like, what a birthday present, a cool game about mental health from a studio that I like. And I got into it. And
it was your favorite game ever.
And I didn't like it.
Oh, no.
I actually did not.
See, Nate has left again, and it's after Evil Within 2 and other stuff, it's just...
He was going to tell me how to enjoy it because I can't figure out how to.
That's funny.
So, and of course I have to feel like I have to preface it. It's great that they're doing stuff like this, that they're creating these games that are kind of focused on, mental health, that have quality actresses, this Melissa Juergens or whatever. She did a pretty good job. But actually playing this game to me was just not a good time. You just when you first start, it really is jarring because the way that this directional headphone sound works, you're hearing these different voices, and they actually say things that
tell me about
are
the voice.
Pretty much like someone would hear if they were schizophrenic. This sort of and I guess they call it psychosis in the game, and people who talk about the game call it psychosis, but it is some variant of schizophrenia. But they say things you'll fall down, and she'll be you'll hear these voices that say, oh, why did she do that? She can't get back up. Oh no, she's really in trouble now. Did she hurt herself? Oh my God. And it's almost like these different voices that are coming in, and it's jarring, and it's actually pretty terrifying. It does a pretty good job of spooking you out, at least at first. And then you get to my favorite part, which are these rune puzzles. And Paul, let me tell you about these rune puzzles, dude.
Mm-hmm.
So you walk up to a door, and you quote unquote focus on it, and you're given these runes. It'll be like, one might look like a Y, one might look like a backwards N, one might look like a P, and then you just go and stare at different stuff in the environment until you see something that looks kind of like that, and then you focus on it, and that's like finding one of the keys to the door. Now, you do have help. There are these, like, whenever you get close to wherever you're supposed to be looking, there are these little, like, like the little rune will just be floating in the air around you. You'll see like a bunch of little P's near you, and it's like, oh, you're getting close to where you're supposed to be staring.
Right.
But it was like tedious and boring. And and I think that part of the idea is that, if you are like a paranoid schizophrenic, then you're going to see meaning in random things. You're going to think that, oh, I saw that tree, and that tree makes me think that someone might be following me, or whatever it is. And so I guess I kind of feel like, I see what it's kind of trying to do with that. But man, it was boring. And they're one after the other of these rune puzzles. Like, it's just,
yeah, there are a lot of them.
Rune puzzle. And then there are times where you're like, when I finally quit, it was like I had done like 4 rune puzzles in a row, and there was another rune puzzle, of course, because they never end. And I was supposed to light this torch that would cast a shadow on the wall, and then I needed to walk through this waterfall, and then somehow relight my torch and light a brazier or something on the other side to cast some shadows so I could make an M. And I ran through this thing, and of course it put out my torch, and at this particular point in the game, darkness is bad news. I mean, it's like Alan Wake if Alan Wake wasn't fun. And you're like running through this darkness, and like apparently, and you can't really see where you're going, especially because the game's trying to do these effects of like your interstate getting tormented. And so I was having trouble even figuring out where I was running. And then I crouched underneath this like rock and tried to walk through this little opening. And then I died, and I tried it again, and I died, and then I tried it again, and then I died, and then I deleted the game. So that was kind of where we are.
Yeah, but that's the thing.
It was a long slog. I mean, I knew that I was not enjoying myself when I was like, looking up. I was like, oh man, I heard this game was short. And I know that when I start thinking that, I'm like, okay, something's not clicking here for you. And it just sort of was such a disappointment, and I've actually like looked at sort of like critical takes. There's a guy who does, I think it's like Hamish Black. He does writing on games, on YouTube. And he talked about how, it was boring, but like, and mundane, but he felt like maybe what the game was trying to go for was like that living with mental illness ends up being mundane and boring. And I was like, nah, dude, I think you're trying to help. You're trying, to save this game, but it can't be saved.
That's always a tough thing, and something I feel like, I don't know. You see every now and then in games where they have some really intense theme they're going for like this, and like especially in this case, it's like you could almost stretch any tedious gameplay to be some kind of allegory or metaphor for mental illness, and like it's not even that big of a stretch really. So like you can kind of hand wave almost anything you want to away, and I don't always. It's a really tough thing to try and walk, because I mean, and we talked about this in our game of the year as well, as like I was kind of in a similar boat. Like I did finish the game and enjoyed it overall, but I never really enjoyed the act of playing it that much. And it's like, it's such a weird thing, because it's like that what they're going for is not necessarily like a fun action game or something, but it's like you still want it to play better and be more enjoyable and not have things like these rune puzzles in it. Even if that's some attempted like metaphor for mental illness, it's just.
I mean, I think a game can be engaging without necessarily being fun.
It's like you would hope they could. If it's not fun, you would hope they would find at least some engaging or interesting way for the player to interact that makes sense with the story they're going for. And I feel like with this one, it's like the combat is very simple and straightforward, and didn't always make a lot of sense for the kind of game they were going for.
Let me tell you a funny thing about this combat, all right? So most of the enemies are like super easy.
Yeah.
There's this one guy with a giant hammer who swings horizontally like Astaroth, Paul.
Yeah.
And he is extremely hard to dodge. You kind of just have to back up to get out of him.
Mm-hmm.
But it took me a long time to figure out how to deal with him. And every time like you kind of die in the game, like you fall on your face, and then the camera pans around and stares up at your face. You get to see so much of this girl's face in this game. I mean, she makes the same faces a lot too. And so she's sitting here making this grimace towards the camera, and then it's like 5 or 6 seconds go by before someone finally finishes her off. And if you're really stuck on a part, you get to stare at her stupid grimacing face over and over and over again. And it's like, then the guy brings the hammer down and finally puts her out of her misery. And it's like 10% of the time she's able to kind of get up before they put the finishing blow on her. And so I don't know. It's just like, it's almost like egregiously painful just to like lose in the combat, which is, I mean, who knows? Maybe it goes with the theme, but it was so miserable, dude. Like, you just sit there staring at her face while she gets hit in the back of the head with this gigantic hammer from this dude who looks kind of like Pyramid Head.
Yeah. And you didn't. Yeah. I actually didn't mind the combat that much until the very end of the game. And it sounds like you might not have gotten to this point, but towards the end, they really like throw you into some lengthy combat slogs where it's like, all right, here's 30 enemies, go fight them in a single fight. It gets pretty gnarly. And the matching the symbols in the environment was my least favorite part of the game as well.
And the camera is not good in the combat either. Like, you have to constantly be moving to actually keep people like in your view.
Yeah.
Which might have been good. Who knows? Yeah.
So the thing I actually kind of like about the camera is it's very zoomed in and doesn't give you a lot of peripheral vision, and it's hard to like see what's going on around you. But then that's where the voices come in. Is they'll say like dodge or something. Like they kind of warn you when something behind you is about to hit you. And I thought that was a neat touch. Like I thought that was a neat way to use the voices in combat.
Yeah. And there is there's a TED Talk that's really interesting by a woman who has schizophrenia who actually talked about, coping with the disease for her meant actually becoming friends with the voices in her head, which to me is a really interesting kind of way of conceptualizing this whole experience. But suffice it to say is, as a counselor, as a therapist, I really, really wanted to like this. And I just didn't,
Yeah. I would suggest at least going and watching the ending chunk that you haven't seen.
Yeah, I think I got 4.5 to 5 hours in, and I think it may be 7-hour game or something like that.
Yeah, I feel like my playtime was probably around 6-7 hours, something like that.
Gotcha.
I don't remember exactly off the top of my head, but
yeah. But those are the most interesting things I've been messing with recently.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a little surprised that you dislike that game that much. Not to say that it's perfect, but still.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely in that camp of has really interesting stuff going on, and like I thought the acting was pretty good, and I would say the acting was above average for video games. Sure.
Yeah.
And
I can agree with that.
Yeah, and I like, I thought all of I think the sound design in that game is kind of incredible.
It's a good looking game too.
Yeah, like I feel like all of the presentational stuff in that game is really strong. It's literally just the act of playing it, I don't think is that great.
Yeah, that's
bummer, dude.
Times. Well, it's nothing better than to close out an episode with a game that we all hate. So, it's real positive.
Well, if Nate was here, Nate liked it.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. It was pretty high on Nate's list last year.
Mm-hmm.
So, we liked all the other games we talked about today. So
that's true. That's true. You got to have a positive note to end on. So
it's like the reverse of last episode.
Yeah, exactly. And so speaking of that, I don't think I've forgotten anyone else. So let's try this again. This time with a little more success. Ryan, we will start with you. What are you planning on playing for the next couple of weeks till the next episode?
I'm in the middle of, or a few hours into Gravity Rush Remastered. which has been pretty fun. The setup is kind of wacky, but the gameplay is, and the through line, I think, has actually been pretty good so far. So I'm hoping to knock that out. And then Monster Hunter World, just got that on Thursday, kind of getting into it, and I'm hoping that me, Flex, and Nate have a chance to do some more team hunts.
I like that game.
Yeah, we did our first 3-man last night.
Nice.
And then hopefully more Grim Dawn. Other than that, I may try to squeeze in some more single players, but the Monster Hunter was kind of an unplanned and may end up being a very large chunk.
Yes, give yourself to Monster Hunter. It demands sacrifice.
Well, best of luck with that. Will, what about you? What have you got on your plate for the next little bit?
Well, this is a little embarrassing.
Uh-oh.
I've been playing Cat Quest.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
I like cats.
It's
I like Quest.
cartoony action RPG light game where you play as a cat. And whenever you hit start to pause the game, it says PAWS. It says pause.
It's cute.
I saw that one coming.
I would love to see a video game that prominently features cats that has no puns in it at all.
That's impossible.
I put that as a challenge out there to game developers. I don't think they can do it.
They actually can't. You're right about that.
But I played a bunch of that
Monster
last
Hunter.
night, and it was fun. So I'll probably finish that. And other than that, just co-op-y stuff. So Full Metal Furies, Grim Dawn, because I never stopped playing Grim Dawn.
So I just pulled up the Steam page for Cat Quest, and I just kind of throw this out there. I scrolled down to the system requirements because it looked pretty basic, and the graphics is an Intel HD 520. That's cool. The recommended is an Intel HD 620. Well, that's not even a real video card. But the recommended processor is an i7 7500. Is this thing mining bitcoins in the background? Like,
can you handle it?
No, that's insane.
Look, man, that cat AI is very sophisticated. There are a lot of complex calculations that go.
Congratulations!
That was not what I was saying. That was not what I said.
That is what was said. That's history now, and we're going to write it in history by throwing it over to Flex so he can tell us what he's playing next.
I think I hate cats.
What do you got, Flex?
I will continue to play a game with a lot of cat puns called Monster Hunter World.
Okay.
That game has gripped me, and it seems pretty long. So continue rocking with that. That's probably going to be the main thing I play.
Okay.
I really want to, when I can, play some. So I started Hacknet a while pre-Monster Hunter. I really want to get back to that, and I also really want to play Celeste. So those are kind of the two shorter single-player games I'd like to work in, but it's probably going to be mostly Monster Hunter.
Okay. Yeah, and so as far as for me, I didn't really talk about anything today. I've still been rocking out that Final Fantasy 15 New Game Plus and PUBG, and I'm pretty sure for the next 2 weeks I'm probably gonna keep on doing that same jam. Although I did put a little bit of time into Devil Survivor 2 Record Breaker on 3DS, so I might talk about that a little bit next time.
Nice.
Yeah,
that name.
Yeah, hey,
I'm guessing it's Japanese.
Yeah, that's a Shin Megami Tensei game, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's an Atlas game.
Yeah, I like how you picked the Shin Megami Tensei game and you picked like the most offbeat one possible.
Well, I tried playing Shin Megami Tensei 4, and which is hard to say as it is, and I couldn't get into that. But it was a buy two get one free sale at GameStop. So the other one that I got was Devil Survivor 2, and I just started that. I'm maybe 2 hours in, so I know just enough to know that it's got some turn based strategy elements to it. So maybe I'll have some more to say about that one, but not really much to report right now. So, all right, guys. Well, this has been ATACS episode number 31. we will be back in your feed in about 2 weeks with episode 32. And there, I'm sure we'll talk about all of these things and more. So stay tuned for that. And we will see you guys in about 2 weeks. Thanks for listening.